Two impostors arrived with badges, unaware the man standing before them was an FBI agent. The afternoon sun hung lazily in the sky, spilling a golden warmth over the neighborhood like honey poured across the earth. The rows of houses stood with perfect symmetry, their freshly painted shutters catching the light, their lawns trimmed. With such precision they looked more like carpets than grass. Sprinklers ticked back and forth in steady arcs, scattering droplets that glimmered like tiny jewels before they disappeared into the thirsty soil. Children's laughter echoed faintly down the street as a pair of kids raced on their bicycles, their wheels spinning in rhythmic harmony with the quiet hum of suburban life. It was a scene that looked almost staged, as if taken from a glossy real estate brochure, serene, orderly, untouched by the troubles of the wider world. Neighbors waved casually to each other as they watered flowers or collected mail, the kind of gestures that seemed small but carried the weight of ritual in a community so bound by routine. Here, people valued the appearance of calm as much as calm itself. At the center of this gentle rhythm stood a man who, at first glance, seemed no different than anyone else. He was in his late 30s, tall and broad-shouldered, with the calm confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin. His dark skin glowed faintly under the afternoon light, the lines at the edges of his eyes revealing both age and wisdom. Dressed simply in a plain gray t-shirt and jeans, he looked like any other homeowner tending to his day, unloading groceries from the back of his car with quiet efficiency. A paper bag crinkled in his hands as he carefully lifted it from the trunk, balancing it against his hip. The faint aroma of fresh fruit and bread drifted upward, mingling with the smell of newly cut grass that lingered in the air. He moved with deliberate precision, not rushing, not stalling, as though every small task was part of a larger rhythm. He alone understood. To an observer, nothing about him screamed importance. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't loud. He blended effortlessly into the landscape of suburbia, the kind of neighbor who was polite but private, approachable yet distant enough to keep mystery intact. To most, he was simply the man on the corner. Dependable, consistent, the kind of person whose presence felt steadying even when unnoticed. Yet, there was something in his demeanor, an ease mixed with an alertness, that didn't quite fit the sleepy pace of the neighborhood. His eyes, sharp and attentive, scanned the street even as his hands busied themselves with groceries. His ears seemed to catch every sound, the whir of bicycle tires, the hiss of sprinklers, the distant bark of a dog. Unlike others who surrendered themselves fully to the suburban lull, he remained present, aware, quietly attuned to details that others overlooked. He closed the trunk with a soft thud, resting a moment against the car as the golden light stretched shadows long across the pavement. To anyone watching, he looked like a man enjoying the stillness of his Saturday afternoon. But beneath that quiet exterior, there lived a depth that no one could yet see, a truth waiting patiently beneath the surface of normalcy, hidden in plain sight. The man had just set down the last grocery bag on the porch when the hum of an engine reached his ears. At first, it was unremarkable. A vehicle slowing down in a quiet neighborhood was hardly unusual. But something about the sound made him pause. It wasn't the easy glide of a family sedan or the cheerful putter of a delivery van. This was heavier, darker. The low growl of a large SUV. He turned slightly, shielding his eyes against the sun. Down the street, an obsidian black SUV crawled into view, moving too slowly, too deliberately. Its windows were tinted to an unnatural degree, concealing everything within. Neighbors didn't drive like that here. They waved, they rolled down windows, they stopped to chat. This SUV did none of that. It crept forward until it came to rest, directly at the edge of his driveway, the tires crunching against the curb like the slow, steady footsteps of a predator. The man didn't move at first. He simply watched, his posture relaxed but his eyes narrowing, reading the moment like a chessboard. Then, the doors opened. Two men climbed out. Their steps were sharp, purposeful, and almost rehearsed. They wore dark uniforms that, at a glance, suggested authority: black shirts tucked into stiff pants, belts carrying the kind of heavy pouches associated with law enforcement. Each flashed a badge as they approached, holding it out with just enough flourish to demand attention. "HOA enforcement," one of them barked, his tone clipped, practiced, yet oddly brittle. The man raised a brow, his hand still resting casually on the grocery bag by his feet. "HOA enforcement," he echoed, as though testing the words for weight. The taller of the two agents stepped forward. He was pale, his jaw tight, his eyes darting left and right as if scanning for an audience. "You're in violation of community standards," he declared, his voice pitched just a little too loud, like an actor delivering lines to the back of a theater. "We'll need to inspect your property immediately." On the surface, they seemed convincing. The uniforms carried patches embroidered with a makeshift insignia. The badges gleamed in the sunlight, and their stern expressions mirrored the kind seen on television cops. But as the man studied them, the cracks began to show. The embroidery on their shirts wasn't uniform. One patch sat crooked, the stitching frayed. The logos, supposedly official, looked like they had been copied from a poor printer, the lines fuzzy, the design amateurish. Their badges, though shiny, had a cheapness to them. The metal was too thin, the engraving off-center, the lettering clumsy and generic. HOA Enforcement Division, rather than any legally recognized authority, and their words didn't match. One moment they sounded like police, dropping terms like compliance order and mandatory inspection. The next, they slipped into the jargon of collection agents, threatening financial penalties and property liens. It was as if they had memorized scripts from different plays and were fumbling to merge them. The man noticed more. Their belts bore no handcuffs, no radios, no pepper spray. The SUV behind them, though intimidating, carried license plates that didn't match the state letters and numbers in a sequence that felt wrong, almost laughably so to someone who paid attention. He remained calm, his stance unreadable, though inside his instincts sharpened. Something about this didn't add up. Neighbors might have cowered, intimidated by the display, but he saw the performance for what it was. Theater, clumsy and desperate. The taller man pressed harder, stepping closer, his voice rising. "Sir, failure to comply will result in immediate escalation. Do you understand?" The man tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable, almost curious. His silence seemed to unnerve them more than defiance would have. He let their words hang in the air, let the weight of their false authority settle like dust before deciding to move. "Interesting," he said finally, his voice calm, smooth, steady. "And you said you're with HOA enforcement?" The shorter of the two nodded quickly, almost too eagerly. "That's right. HOA Enforcement Division. Now if you'll just step aside." But even as he spoke, his hand trembled slightly as it gestured toward the door. The badge on his chest tilted awkwardly, catching the light in a way that revealed the flimsy clip holding it in place. It was costume jewelry pretending to be steel dot. The man on the porch folded his arms across his chest, his eyes narrowing just enough to betray the faintest flicker of suspicion. To anyone else, it might have seemed like a small irregularity, a simple case of overeager officials. But to him, every detail was a thread in a tapestry of deceit. And with every passing second, that tapestry was beginning to unravel. Something was wrong here. Deeply wrong. And though the men didn't yet know it, they had chosen the wrong house and the wrong man to confront. The man stood still on his porch, the faint rustle of leaves overhead blending with the steady tick of sprinklers across the street. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he let silence stretch, heavy and uncomfortable. The two supposed officers shifted on their feet, their sharp voices echoing in the quiet suburban air, their attempt at dominance fraying under his calm gaze. His stillness wasn't weakness, it was calculation. He was watching not just their words, but their bodies. The taller one, The self-appointed leader leaned forward aggressively, his shoulders squared too far, his jaw locked tight. It was the stance of someone who wanted to intimidate, but lacked the natural authority to pull it off. His hands twitched slightly at his sides, betraying nerves he tried so hard to conceal. The shorter one couldn't stand still. His eyes flickered, darting nervously from the man to the SUV, then to the houses lining the street. He adjusted his belt twice in the span of a minute, his breathing quickening as if even he wasn't convinced of the uniform he wore. The man on the porch finally broke the silence, his voice calm, almost casual. "You said you're here on HOA business. Do you have paperwork?" The taller officer didn't like being questioned. His lips pressed into a thin line before he yanked a folded paper from the pouch on his belt and thrust it forward. The man took it, unfolding it with slow precision. At a glance, it was laughable. A so-called enforcement order, stamped with a shaky logo that looked photocopied from a website, the ink smeared in places. The language was clumsy, riddled with spelling mistakes, violation of community standards, phrases that didn't belong in any legal document. Whole sections were cobbled together like they'd been stitched from different sources online. It wasn't authority. It was parody. The man's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile, though his eyes remained cold. He raised the paper, letting it flutter slightly in the warm afternoon breeze. "This is your order?" he asked softly. The taller one bristled. "That's right. It's official. You're in clear violation. Non-compliance means immediate penalties." The shorter one piped up, his voice cracking under strain. "And possible arrest. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." A shift rippled through the neighborhood. Curtains twitched. Front doors cracked open, just enough for eyes to peek out. From across the street, a teenager lifted a phone, recording with the instinct of someone raised in the age of viral justice. Another neighbor stood on her porch, arms crossed, eyes narrowing at the sight of strangers raising their voices on an otherwise peaceful afternoon. The man felt the change in the air. The street, once filled with the hum of sprinklers and children's laughter, now pulsed with suspicion and quiet tension. Every movement of the fake officers was being observed, documented, judged. But the two men, perhaps emboldened by their audience or too deep in their own performance to stop, doubled down. "You'll be fined daily until this property is in compliance," the taller one barked, stepping closer, the veins in his neck straining. "We can escalate this further if you continue to obstruct. Arrest isn't off the table. Removal from the community," the shorter one added quickly, as if piling on threats would hide the cracks in their story. "You could lose this house altogether." The man didn't flinch. His arms remained folded across his chest, his stance easy, unbothered. The contrast between their escalating hostility and his steady composure was stark, almost theatrical. Where they shouted, he was silent. Where they gestured wildly, he stood still. He glanced down once more at the paper in his hand, then back, up at the two men. His expression was unreadable, neither fear nor anger, just quiet scrutiny. Inside, his mind ticked like a metronome. Every detail was a tell. The paper, the mismatched uniforms, the trembling hand of the shorter one. The way the taller man's threats grew louder each time his confidence slipped. They were impostors, that much was clear. But he wasn't ready to expose them just yet. Not here, not now. Instead, he let them talk. He let their voices rise, their false authority expand like a balloon stretched to its breaking point. Because the longer they spoke, the more rope they gave themselves, and he knew exactly how to tighten it when the time was right. The tension had stretched to its breaking point. The taller imposter had stepped closer, boots grinding against the gravel of the driveway. His chest puffed as though he were seconds away from shoving past the man who stood in his path. The shorter one lingered just behind, his hand hovering uncertainly near the waistband of his imitation uniform. The afternoon sun blazed down, casting harsh light on every twitch, every bead of sweat, every tremor they tried to disguise as authority. Black Man remained rooted on the porch, still as a stone. His silence had unnerved them, and now, with neighbors recording from across the street, their performance teetered on collapse. Then, slowly, almost casually, he moved. His hand slipped into his pocket with the same calm precision he had carried all along. Not hurried, not threatened, controlled. The impostor stiffened, unsure if he was reaching for a phone, a weapon, or something else entirely. The taller one barked, "Keep your hands where I can see them." But his voice cracked, betraying the fragile core beneath the bravado. The man didn't stop. He withdrew a leather badge holder, worn but polished, its edges softened by years of use. With deliberate care, he flipped it open. The golden letters caught the sunlight, gleaming with authority that could not be faked. Federal Bureau of Investigation. The effect was immediate. The words, the seal, the weight of reality behind that badge crashed through the impostor's flimsy performance like a hammer through glass. The taller man froze mid-step, his mouth opening but no sound coming out. His false confidence, so loud a moment earlier, drained from his face until only fear remained. The shorter one went pale, his breath hitching audibly as his eyes locked on the emblem that carried more power than any shout or threat ever could. Neighborhood, which had been humming with whispers and the faint clicks of phone cameras, went utterly silent. Even the sprinklers seemed to pause, water droplets suspended in the air like they, too, were waiting for what would come next. The man on the porch lifted his gaze to meet theirs, his voice calm, steady, unyielding. "You chose the wrong house. And the wrong man." The words hung heavy in the golden afternoon air, cutting sharper than any threat the impostors had hurled. He didn't need to shout. Authority radiated from his presence now, undeniable, unshakable. The taller impostors. Hands twitched at his sides as though weighing whether to bolt or bluff further. His eyes darted to the SUV parked crookedly at the curb, to the neighbors watching with their phones raised, then back to the badge that gleamed like a mirror of truth. The shorter one stumbled back half a step, his breathing shallow, his earlier aggression replaced by trembling uncertainty. His cheap badge, still clipped to his chest, looked like a child's toy in comparison to the real one that glinted in the sunlight. For the first time, it was clear who controlled the scene, not the men in their sloppy uniforms, not their empty threats, but the man who had stood silently, watching, waiting because he didn't need to prove himself until the exact moment it mattered. Neighbors exchanged glances, whispers rippling through the stillness. Cameras zoomed closer, catching every flicker of fear on the impostors' faces every second of their unraveling. The man didn't move closer. He didn't need to. His badge did the work for him, backed by the calm steel in his voice and the quiet force of his presence. "You came here pretending to uphold the law," he said evenly, his tone now edged with a quiet authority that left no room for argument. "But you've just committed a federal crime." The impostors didn't respond. They couldn't. Their act had crumbled, their masks stripped away by a revelation they had never anticipated. And as the sun dipped lower, painting the street in long golden shadows, it was clear the hunters had just walked straight into the trap of the very prey they thought they were cornering. The silence after the badge reveal stretched, brittle and heavy, until the man, no longer just another neighbor, but an FBI agent standing in his own driveway, broke it. His voice was calm, yet it carried the force of undeniable authority, echoing down the street. "Let's start with those uniforms," he said, turning his gaze from one impostor to the other. He gestured with the slightest tilt of his chin, his badge glinting in the afternoon sun. "They don't match. Wrong stitching. Wrong insignias. Not even close." The taller impostor shifted uncomfortably, tugging at the crooked patch on his shoulder. A ripple of whispers spread through the gathering crowd. Neighbors leaned out from porches, some covering their mouths, others raising phones higher, capturing every detail. "And those badges you keep flashing?" The agent's tone sharpened. Thin tin stamped with the wrong lettering. HOA enforcement isn't a police agency. It doesn't even exist. Gasps rolled down the street like a wave. The shorter imposter instinctively tried to cover his badge with his hand, but it was too late. Too many eyes. Too many cameras had already seen. The agent bent down, picked up the flimsy enforcement order they had shoved at him earlier, and held it between two fingers. His dark eyes scanned the page briefly, then he lifted it for all to see. Misspellings, random capitalization, and no legal seal. "This isn't an enforcement order, it's a bad forgery. You couldn't even get the grammar right." Laughter sharp and incredulous broke from a neighbor across the street. Others joined with murmurs of outrage, their initial fear morphing into something else. Vindication. The impostors faltered, their act disintegrating piece by piece under the weight of the agent's words. Their supposed authority, once bolstered by tone and posture, now looked hollow, childish even. The taller one's jaw tightened, sweat gathering at his temple, while the shorter one shuffled his feet, as though preparing to run. "You came into this neighborhood," the agent continued, his voice cutting through the growing crowd noise, "to scare people, to shake them down for fake fines, to make honest families believe they'd lose their homes if they didn't pay up. That ends today." Every word landed like a gavel. The taller imposter broke first, muttering under his breath, "This is ridiculous. We don't have to stand here." He jerked his chin toward the SUV, urging his partner to retreat. They turned, moving quickly, almost desperately, toward their vehicle, but escape was impossible now. Phones filmed from every angle, capturing their every move. A neighbor stepped onto the sidewalk, shaking his head and pointing his camera directly at the SUV's mismatched plates. Another neighbor called out, "Hey, you're not going anywhere. We've got it all on video." The imposters quickened, their pace, their bravado entirely gone, reduced to clumsy movements that betrayed their panic. The taller one yanked at the driver's side door, fumbling with the handle, while the shorter one scanned the crowd with darting eyes, as though looking for a gap, a chance to vanish. But there was none. The street, once filled with the gentle rhythm of sprinklers and children's bikes, now pulsed with a very different energy: anger, outrage, and empowerment. Whispers turned to shouts. Frauds, caught red-handed, scamming people in broad daylight. The FBI agent didn't move to chase them. He didn't have to. He simply stood tall in his driveway, his badge visible, his presence unshakable, letting the weight of truth and community do the work. The neighbors had seen enough. The imposter's SUV roared to life, but the noise only fueled the chaos around them. Phones pointed, voices rose, and the sound of disbelief mixed with vindicated laughter filled the air. The taller man slammed the door, his face pale, his hands trembling on the wheel. The shorter one barked at him to just drive, but his voice cracked, betraying the terror running through him. For a moment, the street became a stage, the imposters shrinking in. Shame, the neighbors emboldened in unity, and at the center of it all, the man they had chosen to confront, the man who turned out to be the very embodiment of the law they pretended to wield. The once quiet neighborhood had witnessed the unraveling of a scheme in real time, the kind of spectacle no one would soon forget. And as the imposter's SUV jerked forward in a desperate retreat, it was clear the charade had collapsed completely, exposed by truth, by courage, and by the sharp, steady hand of justice. The street, once alive with tension and whispers, slowly began to settle. The black SUV, now surrounded by flashing lights and uniformed officers, was towed away, its occupants cuffed and led toward awaiting patrol cars. Their attempts at intimidation had been undone in spectacular fashion, leaving behind only the echo of fear and false authority dissipating into the warm afternoon air. Neighbors tentatively stepped out from behind doors, porches and windows still processing the extraordinary events they had just witnessed. Children paused mid-bike ride, staring wide-eyed as adults gathered in small clusters, murmuring to one another about what had just occurred. Phones and cameras hung loosely in hands, recording the aftermath, capturing both the tangible and the invisible. A community awakened, a wrong exposed, and the quiet hero who had made it all possible. At the center of the gathering stood the man himself, calm and composed, his posture relaxed but deliberate. The golden afternoon sunlight glinted off his badge, a silent reminder that authority is not a matter of posture or bravado, but of knowledge, integrity, and courage. Despite the chaos that had just unfolded, there was an air of tranquility about him, a reassurance that the threat was gone and that order could return, not through fear but through truth. A neighbor, still clutching her phone, stepped closer. "I can't believe this actually happened. They looked so official, so real," she said, shaking her head. "How did you know?" He met her gaze with calm intensity. "Scams feed on fear and silence," he said evenly, his voice carrying through the quieted street. "They only work when people believe intimidation without proof. Truth is always the strongest defense. Watch closely, ask questions, and never let appearances alone dictate your actions." Heads nodded slowly, the weight of his words settling in their minds. The lesson wasn't just about impostors, it was about vigilance, about understanding that danger and deception often hide behind the familiar. The neighborhood, so accustomed to the routine hum of daily life, now understood the fragility of security and the responsibility each person bore to protect themselves and each other. Small acts of unity began to emerge. Neighbors offered one another reassurance, checking in on those who had been closest to the confrontation. They discussed what to do if similar situations arose, sharing numbers, advice, and strategies for verification. The sense of community had shifted subtly but profoundly. Suspicion, once tinged with fear, was replaced by cautious empowerment. The man watched silently, allowing the energy to flow naturally among the residents. He didn't need applause or accolades. His role had never been about recognition, but about ensuring that truth prevailed. Yet, even in his quietude, there was a tangible respect that radiated from those around him. A young boy, no older than 10, tugged at his mother's sleeve, pointing toward the man. "Mom, he's like a superhero." The agent's lips curved into the faintest smile, a glimmer of warmth crossing his composed exterior. He knelt briefly to meet the child's eyes. "Courage isn't about being fearless," he said softly. "It's about standing firm for what's right, even when the world tries to deceive you." As the sun lowered, casting long golden shadows across the street, the neighborhood lingered in a moment of quiet reflection. The ordinary rhythm of suburban life, sprinklers, bike rides, distant laughter resumed, but it was subtly different now. There was awareness, a collective consciousness sharpened by experience, tempered by gratitude, and reinforced by the example set by one man's unwavering adherence to truth. The man returned to his groceries, placing them inside his home with the same careful precision he had displayed hours earlier. To anyone passing by, he remained the quiet, composed neighbor who had simply gone about his day. But to those who had witnessed the encounter, he was something more, a symbol of courage, intelligence, and moral integrity. His presence served as proof that deception, no matter how brazen, can never endure against knowledge, vigilance, and the steady light of truth. And as the evening sun painted the neighborhood in deep, warm tones, the lesson lingered in every eye, every mind, and every conversation, that the strongest defense against fear and manipulation is not aggression or bravado, but clarity, unity, and the unwavering commitment to what is right.